There is a truth so powerful, so life-altering that once fully understood, it divides a person's life into two parts, before they knew it and after. This truth is not hidden because it's complicated, it's hidden because it's simple, so simple in fact that most people overlook it entirely. It has to do with the mind. More specifically, it has to do with the extraordinary power your mind has to shape your life, your results, your relationships, and your destiny. And the greatest tragedy is this: no one teaches you how to use it. Not in school, not in the workplace, not even at home. You're handed the most powerful instrument in the world, a human mind, and no one gives you the manual. And so most people drift through life, reacting instead of creating, surviving instead of thriving, wondering why success feels like a mystery or a miracle, when in truth it is a mechanical process governed by laws as real as gravity. What they hid from you about success and the mind is this: you are always programming yourself. Always. Whether you know it or not, whether you mean to or not. Every thought you repeat, every belief you accept, every story you tell yourself, these are the codes being installed into your subconscious. And your subconscious does not question the code, it simply runs it. Your self-image, your earning potential, your confidence, your habits, they're all reflections of that code. Most people live like passengers in their own minds. They inherit thoughts from culture, from media, from family, and they never stop to ask, is this belief helping me or hurting me? The individual meant to succeed becomes conscious of this. They realize that the mind is not a passive observer, it is a creative engine. And if you want a new life, you must give it new instructions. Let me explain why this is so critical. The subconscious mind is like soil. It does not care what you plant. It will return whatever you consistently sow, whether that's weeds or wheat, problems or solutions, fear or faith. It makes no moral judgments. It responds to repetition. And the thoughts you repeat, the language you use, the images you hold, they all go into the soil, and in time they grow. They express themselves through your actions, your posture, your tone, your decisions. This is not theory. This is cause and effect. And yet what they don't tell you is that most people are planting weeds by default. They wake up and consume negativity. They speak in limitations. They reinforce weakness through their internal dialogue. And then they wonder why they feel stuck, why their life looks the same year after year. The answer is simple. Their programming never changed. Take this seriously. Your mind is programmable, and you are the programmer. That is the most empowering truth you will ever hear. It means you can override old fears, install new standards, and build new habits, not overnight, but over time through repetition and intention. The mind learns through consistent input. That's why affirmations, visualizations, and journaling work, not because they are magical, but because they are mechanical. They give the subconscious a new blueprint, and once that blueprint is accepted, the subconscious will begin reshaping your behavior, your decisions, and your environment to match it. The man who sees himself as confident begins to stand taller. The woman who believes she is worthy begins to speak with certainty. Not because the world changed, but because they did, and the world merely reflected it back. Now let's talk about one of the most dangerous myths you've been told, that success is about talent. It isn't. It never has been. Talent is potential, but programming is power. A person with average talent and powerful mental programming will outperform a gifted person with weak self-image every single time. Because life doesn't respond to raw talent, it responds to belief, to energy, to repetition, to persistence. And these are all driven by your mental programming. This is why you'll often see someone with less education, less experience, less polish, rise above someone who seems to have all the advantages. Why? Because one of them believed, one of them acted, one of them installed a new identity and refused to settle for the old one. And that is what changes outcomes, not credentials, but consciousness. There's another lie you were never warned about, that thinking is passive. It isn't. Thinking is creative. Every time you think a thought, you are setting something in motion. Your thoughts trigger feelings. Your feelings influence behavior. Your behavior reinforces results, and your results confirm your beliefs. This is the cycle. And the only way to break the cycle is to intervene at the source, your thinking. That's why I always say we become what we think about. It's not poetic. It's not philosophical. It's literal. You become what you think about most often, most emotionally, and most consistently. So ask yourself, what have I been thinking about? What thoughts have I allowed to take root? Because those thoughts are shaping your reality, whether you realize it or not. And the sooner you take command of them, the sooner you begin to shape your life on purpose. There is no limit to what your mind can achieve when it is properly directed. But it must be directed. The mind left unattended becomes a factory of fear. It begins to manufacture worry, doubt, insecurity, not because you are broken, but because that is the default setting of an undisciplined mind. And just like a garden left untended will grow weeds, a mind left untrained will grow limitations. That's why the successful make time for mental training. They don't leave it to chance. They prime their thoughts in the morning. They guard their input during the day. They review their progress in the evening. They treat their mind like an asset because it is the most valuable asset they will ever own. And because of that, they keep it sharp, clean, and clear. Not occasionally, but daily. So what does this mean for you? It means the gap between where you are and where you want to be is not talent, it's not intelligence, it's not background or access or education, it's programming. And the moment you decide to reprogram your mind, everything changes. Not instantly, but progressively. You begin to move differently, speak differently, attract differently, because your subconscious is no longer pulling you toward the past, it is now pulling you toward the future, the one you chose, the one you planted, the one you've begun to believe is yours. And that belief, when backed by behavior, becomes unstoppable. Not because of luck, but because of law, the law that says, as within, so without. Change the mind and you change the man. Change the man and you change the result. Every time. There's a phenomenon I've observed in those who break through to extraordinary success. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come by accident. It begins the moment they realize that the world is not waiting to reward them, it is waiting to reflect them. Your external life is not some disconnected accident, separate from your inner world. It is a mirror, and this mirror shows you not who you want to be, but who you are being. It shows you your patterns, your habits, your standards, your self-image. And unless those elements change, the reflection will remain the same. This is what they never taught you in school. You were trained to memorize, to pass, to conform. But you were never taught to imagine, to affirm, to visualize, to program. And yet those are the very skills that determine whether you move from mediocrity to mastery, whether you stay stuck or you start to shape reality by design. The truth is, most people are living in reaction. Reaction to past wounds, reaction to current fears, reaction to their environment. And what they don't realize is that living in reaction keeps them enslaved to the same thoughts and emotions that created the very results they want to escape. The successful learn to live in creation. Creation begins with intention, and intention begins in the mind. You do not rise by reacting. You rise by designing, by stepping back and asking, what kind of person creates the result I desire? What habits do they keep? What decisions do they make when things get hard? How do they speak to themselves when no one's listening? These questions move you from fantasy to formation, and the moment you begin to live in alignment with the answers, your life begins to reflect the identity you've chosen, not the one you were handed. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood forces in the world, belief. Everyone talks about believing in yourself, but few ever explain what that truly means. Belief is not passive, it is not blind hope or vague confidence. Belief is a commitment backed by behavior. When you believe something, your actions align with it. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop entertaining the opinions of people who haven't built what you want. You stop outsourcing your decisions to comfort. Real belief changes how you walk into a room. It sharpens your tone. It directs your schedule. It dictates your response to failure. And belief, once fully formed, becomes magnetic. The mind that believes is no longer timid. It does not hesitate. It does not drift. It moves with clarity and conviction, not because it knows how everything will unfold, but because it has decided to move anyway. That's what they never told you. That belief is not something you wait to feel, it's something you choose to install, just like a program, just like a habit. Belief is built through repetition, through exposure, through the consistent review of truth. If you've believed you're not good enough, not ready, not worthy, that's not who you are, it's what you've rehearsed. And the good news is this: any belief installed can be uninstalled. Any belief formed can be replaced. But you must do the work. You must be intentional about what thoughts you allow to occupy your mind, because what occupies your mind will eventually occupy your life. That's why those meant for success guard their mind like a vault. They choose their thoughts like a sculptor chooses a tool, with precision, with purpose, and with the final masterpiece in mind. Take this seriously. Your dominant thoughts shape your self-image, and your self-image sets the ceiling on your results. If you see yourself as average, you will subconsciously sabotage anything that contradicts that image. If you see yourself as powerful, you will rise to meet the challenges that demand power. The subconscious is not interested in your wishes, it is interested in consistency. It will go to great lengths to make your life match the image you've accepted. So if you want better results, you must give your mind a better image, one that is worthy of the life you desire, one that does not shrink to meet expectations, but expands to define new ones. And once that image is locked in, your habits, your choices, and your opportunities begin to evolve to match it. That's the hidden mechanism of transformation. It always begins inside. Here's something else they never taught you. Language is not just communication, it's programming. The words you use shape your identity. When you say, "I'm always late," you are reinforcing an identity. When you say, "I never follow through," you are giving your subconscious an instruction, and the subconscious will comply, not because it is logical, but because it is loyal. Loyal to what you say, loyal to what you believe, loyal to what you repeat. This is why the successful are careful with their words. They speak with vision, they affirm their standards. They do not joke about failure, weakness, or limitation, because they know the mind doesn't understand sarcasm. It understands repetition, and repetition builds reality. So speak the identity you want, not the one you fear. Declare the result you expect, not the one you're trying to avoid, and do it daily, until your mind no longer sees it as fantasy, but as fact. Let me now speak to your daily habits, because they are the physical proof of your internal programming. The individual meant to succeed builds their day on purpose. They don't just wake up and hope for focus, they engineer it. They don't rely on motivation, they rely on ritual. Morning routines, focus blocks, deep work, reflection, visualization, all of these are not luxuries. They are necessities. They tell the mind, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is the standard now. And the more often you live by that standard, the more the mind begins to protect it, to defend it, to reject anything that contradicts it. This is the compounding effect of identity, and it begins with what you do daily, not what you plan, not what you intend, but what you execute, especially when no one's watching. You must understand the mind is always looking for evidence, and when you act in alignment with your higher identity, even in small ways, you give the mind new evidence, evidence that you are focused, that you are disciplined, that you are committed, and that evidence becomes the new baseline. So if you've ever struggled to believe in yourself, stop trying to feel belief and start producing evidence. Get the small win, do the hard thing, keep the promise, and then reflect on it, affirm it, replay it in your mind. That loop action, affirmation, reflection is what builds belief, and that belief reinforced becomes certainty, and certainty changes everything. It sharpens your decisions, it attracts new people, it raises your standards, and before long your outer world begins to catch up with your inner decision. Most people never realize that success is not a result of external chance but internal chemistry. What they hid from you about the mind is that it is not just a vessel for thought, it is a mechanism of response. Every idea, every belief, every image you entertain repeatedly creates a physiological and psychological response within your body. Your nervous system listens to your thoughts like instructions from a commander. When you consistently dwell on worry, your body prepares for retreat. When you dwell on power, your body prepares for engagement. This is not self-help hype, it's neuroscience. Thought is not passive, it's electrical. It fires, it wires, and it creates a pattern that your body obeys. That's why the individual meant to succeed doesn't just think better, they feel better. Their body becomes tuned to progress, their posture changes, their presence intensifies, their energy becomes directed. And it all starts with repeated internal dialogue that supports, not sabotages, their pursuit. Now let's dismantle another myth, that thinking and feeling are separate from doing. They are not. They are the beginning of doing. Every result you've ever produced started with a thought that became a dominant emotional state. That emotional state then shaped your willingness to act, your endurance, and your performance. If you consistently think of yourself as someone who follows through, someone who finishes, someone who rises, your body begins to anticipate that outcome. You breathe differently, you speak differently, you begin to live into the expectation you've created for yourself. But the reverse is also true. If your dominant thoughts are defeat, doubt, or delay, your body becomes sluggish, your actions become hesitant, and your results begin to mirror that hesitation. This is why successful people spend time conditioning the mind, not as a morning hobby, but as a survival skill, because they understand that how you think is how you feel, and how you feel is how you move, and how you move determines what you build. This brings us to the law of identity reinforcement. Whatever you consistently affirm, visualize, or act upon becomes who you are. And here's what they never told you. Identity is not fixed. It's a loop. It begins with belief. That belief informs behavior. That behavior produces results. Those results reinforce the original belief. If the loop is weak, it becomes a cycle of failure. But if the loop is directed with intention, it becomes a cycle of unstoppable momentum. The individual meant to succeed learns to interrupt the negative loop by implanting a new belief before the world gives them permission to do so. They visualize it, they speak it, they write it, they act on it. They don't wait for the world to believe it, they believe it first. Because the mind doesn't need permission to rewire. It needs repetition. That's the secret. Not drama, not intensity. Repetition. Quiet, persistent repetition of truth until it becomes default. And let me make this absolutely clear. You are always becoming. Whether you're aware of it or not, you are forming habits, wiring neural pathways, reinforcing a self-concept. The question is not whether change is happening. The question is, are you directing the change? If not, you are becoming whatever your environment dictates, whatever your fears suggest, whatever your old programming reinforces. But the moment you interrupt the automatic and install the intentional, you take back control. You begin to build your self-image on purpose. You stop waiting to feel different, and you begin acting different, because action feeds identity faster than intention ever could. This is what most never learn. They try to think their way into a new life, but the mind doesn't fully change until it sees new behavior. So if you want to shift who you are, shift how you move, let your movement signal to your brain that the new version of you is already in motion. This is why high performers often speak in identity language. I am a finisher. I am a disciplined. I am a creator. They are not making claims, they are making commands. These are declarations to the subconscious, instructions that shape attention, action, and attraction. You've been taught to describe your reality, but those meant for success have trained themselves to declare their reality. Because the subconscious listens more to what you say after I am than it does to any external circumstance. If you say, I am tired, I am not good enough, I am always struggling, the subconscious takes that as truth and begins to produce behaviors and emotional states that match. But if you say, I am focused, I am consistent, I am growing, and you reinforce it with action, the mind rewires. Slowly, yes, but permanently. Identity is shaped by repetition with emotion, and those who understand this begin to speak differently, move differently, and attract differently. Now let's address the environment. What they never told you is that your surroundings are programming you even when you're not paying attention. Your room, your desk, the people you speak to, the content you consume, every bit of it sends signals to your subconscious, and your subconscious takes those signals and builds assumptions. If your environment is chaotic, your thoughts will be chaotic. If your surroundings are filled with distraction, your focus will be fragmented. But if your environment reflects order, focus, and ambition, your internal world begins to match. That's why the successful curate their space. They're not trying to be neat for show. They are creating a signal that says this is a space for discipline, for creation, for growth. And the mind responds, because the mind takes cues from what it sees. So if you want to build a better mind, build a better environment, one that reflects who you're becoming, not who you've been. There's another truth you need to hear. The greatest minds in history, those who built empires, revolutionized industries, changed the trajectory of nations, they were not just thinkers, they were programmers. They programmed their time, their speech, their inputs, their emotions. They did not drift, they designed. They practiced mental rehearsal. They wrote down goals with precision. They imagined the future in vivid detail and spoke about it as if it were already real. This was not delusion, it was design, and eventually their inner vision became outer reality. That is not coincidence, that is cause and effect. And you have the same tool they had, the same mind, the same capacity. What separates you is not ability, it's awareness. And now that you're aware, you are no longer allowed to act like you're not responsible, because once you know how the mind works, everything becomes your responsibility. Your mood, your focus, your words, your actions, your results. So as you listen to this, recognize the power now in your hands. You can begin today, this very hour, to change your future by changing the instructions you give your mind. Write them, repeat them, act on them, visualize them, speak them with certainty. Let no weak phrase pass your lips. Let no disempowering thought go unchallenged. Let no day pass without reinforcing the identity you've chosen. Because every day and every moment you are programming the instrument that creates your future. And if you do it with intention, discipline, and consistency, there will come a day not far from now when people ask how you did it, and you will smile, because you'll know the secret wasn't outside, it was inside all along. There's a level of responsibility that very few are willing to accept, but it is the exact level required to achieve true and lasting success. What they hid from you about the mind is that once you understand how it works, how it shapes your life, every excuse becomes obsolete, every delay becomes a conscious decision, every failure to follow through becomes a reflection of your programming, not your potential. And once you realize this, you can never go back. You can't blame your environment. You can't point fingers at your upbringing. You can't hide behind the myth of luck, because now you know the mind was never your enemy. It was your tool. It was always waiting for you to take control, to give it direction, to discipline it like an instrument of precision. But if you don't, if you let the mind run wild, it becomes a saboteur, not out of malice, but out of habit. It simply reinforces what you feed it. And this truth puts you in a position of ultimate responsibility. The kind of responsibility that requires maturity, ownership, vision. It demands that you become the author, not the echo. Let's talk now about standards, because they are the invisible rulers of your life. You do not rise to the level of your dreams. You fall to the level of your standards. And those standards are formed by what your mind accepts as normal. Most people never succeed because they've programmed their minds to normalize mediocrity. They tolerate clutter. They tolerate distraction. They tolerate being late, missing steps, skipping reps. They don't realize that every small tolerance is a line of code being written into their subconscious, and that code becomes law. That law becomes identity, and that identity becomes reality. The successful person breaks this cycle. They raise the standard of what is acceptable, not through inspiration, but through design. They upgrade their self-talk. They curate their inputs. They observe their habits with clinical precision, and over time the mind adjusts. The new standard becomes familiar, and once the mind accepts a new baseline, it works tirelessly to maintain it. This is the great secret of sustained transformation. Normalize the elevated. Make excellence your default setting. Make clarity your new comfort zone. Make execution your new habit. Most people try to do this through willpower, but willpower is not sustainable. Programming is. If you want to be disciplined, you must train your mind to expect discipline. If you want to be consistent, you must speak and act as though consistency is your nature, not your goal. The mind doesn't respond to hope. It responds to instruction. It responds to evidence, and you provide that evidence every time you do what you said you would do, every time you finish what you started, every time you say no to the thing that tempts you and yes to the thing that grows you. That evidence compounds, and over time the subconscious begins to see discipline as identity, not effort. And this leads us into the power of repetition. Repetition is the language of the subconscious. It's how the mind learns, accepts, and installs new beliefs. That's why one powerful thought is not enough. One burst of motivation is not enough. You must hear it again. Say it again. Do it again. Repetition is what turns conscious effort into unconscious behavior. It's what turns a new habit into a lifestyle. What they never told you is that every repeated thought becomes a neural groove. And once that groove is deep enough, your mind will run down it automatically. That's why most people stay stuck, not because they're incapable, but because their neural pathways have been carved by years of negative reinforcement. But the mind can be rewired, and the way you do it is by flooding it with the new belief, not once, not occasionally, daily, hourly if needed, until the new thought becomes stronger than the old one. That's how you build a new mental reality. Let me be clear, repetition without emotion is weak. It's not enough to just repeat words, you must feel them. The mind learns fastest when emotion is attached. That's why moments of trauma shape us so powerfully, because the emotion was strong. But you can reverse this. You can use positive emotion to burn new truths into the mind. When you speak your affirmations, feel them. When you visualize your goal, immerse in it. Engage your senses, involve your body. Smile when you say, I am focused, I am powerful, I finish everything I start. Let your physiology match your intention. That pairing of thought and emotion is what accelerates neural rewiring. It tells the mind, this is real, this matters, store this, reinforce this, and when you do it long enough, the internal shift becomes visible externally. People start to notice, you start to move differently, and you realize it's not a new world you need, it's a new mind. Now understand this, discipline is not something you do, it is something you become. But to become it, You must first decide that your word is law, that what you say to yourself is final, that you do not break promises to yourself. Most people treat self-promises like suggestions. They commit in the morning, abandon it by noon, and then wonder why they don't trust themselves. But the successful build trust internally. They treat their own word with respect. They say, if I said I will, I will. And this integrity of self is what gives them quiet power. It's what allows them to lead without force, to influence without noise, to move through the world with certainty. And that certainty comes from one thing, inner congruence. What they say, they do. What they believe, they reinforce. What they imagine, they pursue. And that alignment creates momentum, not fleeting but permanent, because the engine driving it is identity. Let's speak now about mental resilience. Because if success is to be sustained, the mind must be trained to endure pressure. And pressure reveals what's real. Under pressure, the undisciplined mind fractures. It reverts. It panics. But the trained mind becomes sharper under pressure. It slows time. It sees options. It adjusts, adapts, and advances. This is not talent. It is conditioning. Built over time by choosing hard things, by showing up when it's cold, by staying focused when others drift, by training the mind to say, this is challenge, not catastrophe. This is a test, not a threat. And with each repetition, the mind becomes more composed, more strategic, more calm. This is the state from which great decisions are made, from which great moves are launched. This is how legacy is built, not in comfort, but in the crucible of challenge. And finally, understand this? The mind was given to you as a servant, but most people make it their master. They let it lead them instead of leading it. And that's the inversion. That's what keeps most people trapped. They think because a thought arises, it must be true. They think because a fear shows up, it must be valid. But the successful learn to observe the mind, to watch their thoughts without obeying all of them, to listen to fear without surrendering to it, to feel doubt without halting progress. They are no longer slaves to thought, they are sculptors of thought. And that's the highest power of all, to command the very instrument that shapes your life, to use the mind to build, not to break, to create, not to cope. And once you learn to do that, not once but consistently, you are no longer participating in life by accident. You are designing it on purpose. There's a moment that comes to every person on the path to mastery, an internal crossing point where you realize that success isn't about chasing outcomes, but about mastering the self. Not the outer world, not the competition, not the economy. The self, the mind. And once you see this, everything changes. Because what they've hidden from you, what society rarely speaks about, is that the greatest obstacle you will ever face is not failure. It's your own undisciplined mind. A mind that drifts when it should focus. A mind that doubts when it should believe. A mind that seeks escape when it should endure. And unless that mind is brought under direction, nothing else will hold. Not goals, not motivation, not habits. Because it is the mind that initiates every behavior. It is the mind that sustains every standard. And it is the mind that ultimately determines who rises and who repeats the same year for a lifetime. Now let's talk about the lie of balance. You've been told to seek balance. But the individual meant to succeed doesn't chase balance. They build alignment, and there's a difference. Balance says give everything equal weight. Alignment says give everything its proper weight. That means there are seasons where your discipline must come first, where your mission must override your comfort, where your growth must eclipse your entertainment. Balance is reactive. It bends to pressure. But alignment is deliberate. It flows from values. It honors your hierarchy. And when your life is in alignment with your vision, you don't burn out. You build up. You grow into the capacity required to sustain the life you've envisioned. But that only happens when the mind is taught to stop negotiating with weakness. And that negotiation must end. Because as long as you're still debating with your lower self, your higher self remains on hold. What they didn't teach you about the mind is that it runs on default unless you give it direction. And its default mode is protection, safety, familiarity. The mind prefers the known even when the known is killing your future. It will whisper, stay here, this is safe. It will exaggerate risk and downplay reward. And unless you interrupt that pattern daily, it will win. This is why mental rehearsal, self-talk, and visualization are non-negotiables for the high performer. They're not mental fluff, they're reprogramming tools. Every time you visualize success, you install the idea of it in your nervous system. Every time you speak in alignment with who you're becoming, you fortify that identity. And every time you override a comfort-driven impulse with a purpose-driven action, you weaken the grip of the old mind. This is how transformation begins, not in grand gestures but in consistent defiance of the default. Let's look now at decision-making. Most people think decisions are made in the moment, but they're not. They're made in advance by your identity. The man who identifies as disciplined doesn't decide each morning whether to work. He works. The woman who sees herself as focused doesn't debate whether to say no to distraction. She says no, because the decision was made before the moment arrived. That's what mental programming gives you, automation of excellence. It removes the friction from doing the right thing. It makes the hard thing easier, not because life is easy, but because you've trained your mind to follow a higher standard. And over time, that standard becomes your default. You no longer try to be disciplined. You are disciplined. You no longer force focus. You are focused. This is the shift. This is the turning point. And it only happens through repetition and intention. There's another hidden layer to all of this: emotional sovereignty. What most never learn is that your emotions are not fixed reactions. They are programmable states, and just like habits, they can be trained. You can train yourself to feel gratitude, to feel confidence, to feel certainty, not just when things go well, but especially when they don't. The successful do not rely on the world to give them good feelings. They generate them. They condition their emotional states like athletes condition their bodies. They practice calm under pressure, clarity under chaos, discipline under fatigue. And the way they do this is by repeatedly exposing themselves to challenge and choosing their response. This is what builds internal strength, emotional muscles. And those muscles are what allow you to stay composed when others crack, to stay clear when others get cloudy, to move forward when others freeze. That is emotional mastery, and it begins again with the mind. Now let's address fear, because fear is the great silencer, the quiet thief of action, potential, and purpose. And here's what they never told you about fear: it is not a signal to stop, it is a signal to focus. Fear means you're touching something that matters, something that stretches your current identity, and most run from that. But those meant to succeed move toward it. They don't wait for fear to vanish, they move in spite of it, because they've trained their mind to reframe fear as fuel, as a compass, as a growth alarm. And every time they act in the presence of fear, they grow stronger, not just braver, but more capable, more grounded, more aligned. So if you're afraid of something, good. That means you've found the edge, and the edge is where expansion lives. Another truth they kept quiet is this: boredom is part of greatness. We're sold the idea that the path should always be exciting, but the path to mastery is often mundane. It's not always fireworks and breakthroughs. It's repetition. It's refinement. It's showing up on the days when nothing feels new. And this is where most people quit, not because they're weak, but because they were misinformed. They thought progress would always feel like progress, but it doesn't. Sometimes it feels like routine, like quiet, like another set, another rep, another journal page, another disciplined decision. But those are the bricks, the invisible wins, the uncelebrated steps that build the foundation of a life that others admire but rarely understand. If you can fall in love with that, if you can train your mind to value the process more than the praise, then you've already separated yourself from the masses. So here's your invitation. Take full ownership of your mental programming. Begin today. No one will do it for you, and no one can stop you once you begin. Reprogram your language. Direct your focus. Visualize your identity. Command your standards. Audit your environment. Train your emotions. Move toward the fear. Love the process, because this is the way forward. This is the way out of stagnation, out of survival, out of smallness. And this is the way into a life you'll be proud to have built. Not because it was easy, but because it was deliberate. The final evolution of success is not about doing more, it's about becoming more. Most people are trapped in a cycle of trying to improve their actions without upgrading their identity. They work harder, they grind longer, they push through burnout, but they never pause to ask the real question: who do I need to become to make success inevitable? That question changes everything, because what they hid from you about the mind is that your actions will never permanently outpace your identity. You will always return to the level of your self-image. If you see yourself as average, you'll sabotage anything extraordinary. If you see yourself as chaotic, you'll destroy anything structured. If you see yourself as weak, you'll shrink from any opportunity that requires strength. So no matter how hard you push, if your inner world contradicts your outer goals, you will eventually snap back to the identity you've rehearsed. The solution? Stop fixing behavior, start forging identity. Build a new version of you so real, so rehearsed, that the old you becomes It's not an idea. It's not a feeling. It's a pattern. A pattern of how you think, how you respond, how you prepare, how you speak, how you walk into a room. Identity is not declared, it is demonstrated. It's in the way you treat your calendar, the way you treat your body, the way you treat your word. It's in your tone, your tempo, your tolerance for distraction. Every detail you execute with discipline reinforces a mental loop. This is who I am now. And the more times you close that loop, the deeper the groove in your subconscious. Until eventually effort becomes nature, resistance becomes rare, and consistency becomes your signature. Not because you forced yourself into action, but because you finally became someone who no longer negotiates with mediocrity, someone who no longer accepts the old rhythm, someone who lives by a code. That code is your new mind. The most powerful force in human behavior is the need to remain consistent with who we believe we are. This is why transformation fails for most people. They try to add success behaviors to a failure identity. They set ambitious goals but never rewrite the narrative. They start new habits but their self-talk still says, "I'm not the kind of person who finishes," and the subconscious listens. It watches for alignment. And when it sees contradiction, ambition without belief, action without identity, it pulls the handbrake. It finds ways to sabotage, to delay, to distract. Not because it hates you, but because it seeks congruence. And until you update the story, you will unconsciously work to make it true. That's why the successful spend more time rehearsing the new identity than obsessing over the goal. They know that once the new self is installed, the results are inevitable. Identity drives action, action drives results, and the loop continues, upward or downward, depending on the story you allow to live in your mind. So what's the process? First, clarity. You must define in brutal detail the version of you that would make success your new baseline. Write it out. Speak it out. Visualize it daily. Not just what they do, but how they move, how they think, how they recover. Second, embodiment. You don't wait to feel like them. You act like them. You reverse engineer the version of you that already exists in your imagination. You wear the clothes. You follow the schedule. You hold the posture. You use the words. Third, reinforcement. You surround yourself with inputs, people, and environments that validate the new you. You cut off the voices that feed the old you. You set up systems, reminders, and rituals that make the new self the only self. And finally, protection. You guard this new identity with everything you have, because the world will try to pull you back, not out of malice but out of familiarity. But you don't owe the old you anything. Not loyalty, not nostalgia, not explanation. Understand this, most people fail not because they're incapable, but because they're surrounded by cues that keep them in a low-level identity. Your brain is always scanning for patterns, and if your bedroom, your phone, your friends, your feed, if they all scream the old story, your mind will keep running the old code. That's why environment design is one of the most underrated disciplines in success. If you want to change the trajectory of your life, change what your mind sees 90% of the time. Upgrade the room you think in, clean the space you sleep in, audit the voices you listen to, curate the future until it's all around you. Because when the future surrounds you, the past loses power, and when your surroundings scream success louder than your doubt whispers failure, the mind begins to align. Now let me speak to the power of detachment. The successful do not cling, they do not beg, they do not need the outcome to prove anything. They move with calm certainty, not because they know exactly how it will unfold, but because they've decided who they are no matter what. Detachment is not weakness, it is strength. It says, I move forward without obsession. I take action without addiction to results. I give everything, and then I release it. This keeps the mind free, light, nimble. It allows for adaptation, for creativity, for flow. Most people fail because they clutch the outcome. They wrap their identity around what happens. But the person meant to succeed wraps their identity around the process, around the standard, around the rhythm of who they've become. And this makes them unshakable, because no matter what comes, they remain. So where does all of this lead? To mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of structure, mastery of the mind. And mastery is not a destination, it's a devotion, a lifetime of alignment between thought, action, and identity. The people who reach this place don't just succeed, they live differently. They wake up with clarity, they work with direction, they rest with peace. They are not constantly starting over. They are not easily rattled. They don't need hype. They don't need approval. They move with clean energy because the noise is gone, the gaps are closed, The code is clean, and when the code is clean, the performance is inevitable. It's not about the next breakthrough. It's about the next repetition, not about the next high, but the next alignment. There's a shift that occurs when a person stops consuming their life and starts constructing it. Most people live like passengers in their own story, reacting to what happens, hoping things improve, wishing for motivation to return. But what they hid from you about success and the mind is that motivation is not the beginning, it is the result. It is the byproduct of aligned action repeated with consistency. The individual meant to succeed learns to act first and feel later. They understand that emotion follows behavior, not the other way around. They don't wait to feel inspired to train, to build, to focus. They train until the mind associates effort with pride. They focus until their default state is clarity. They build until the brain links productivity with peace. This is how momentum begins, not by waiting for the storm to pass, but by deciding to build in the rain. Because the act of showing up, even when conditions aren't perfect, is the very act that trains the mind to believe in your future. What most people never understand is that your future is not protected by your intentions, it is protected by your systems. Systems of thought, systems of language, systems of behavior. Your subconscious doesn't respond to what you mean to do, it responds to what you habitually do. That means the person who wins is not the person with the best goals, but the person with the best architecture, the one who turns clarity into structure, the one who builds triggers into their environment that support their behavior, the one who uses checklists, routines, rituals, not because they're obsessed with productivity, but because they understand how to program their mind through structure. Structure is freedom. It eliminates negotiation. It replaces friction with flow. The great minds of history, Da Vinci, Edison, Carnegie, Churchill, were all men of structure. Men who didn't rely on motivation, but instead created systems that reinforced excellence until excellence became identity. You see, the secret is not just self-discipline, it's self-automation. You must become the kind of person whose behavior no longer requires debate. Wake, work, focus, reflect. These are not heroic moments. They are automated responses, and automation comes from repetition plus environment. If your environment is designed to support your identity, your brain doesn't have to waste willpower every time it's time to act. That's why your phone must be out of reach during deep work. That's why your desk must be clear when it's time to write. That's why your room must be clean when it's time to sleep, because the mind takes cues from what it sees. And if the environment is in conflict with your future, your subconscious will be too. But when everything around you affirms your standards, your subconscious relaxes. It stops resisting, it begins to obey. Now we must talk about reinforcement, because repetition is not enough without reflection. The mind must be reminded of its progress. That's why the successful journal track and review. They do not drift through days hoping things improve. They measure, they analyze, they adjust, because they understand that feedback is how you accelerate growth. But most people avoid feedback not because they don't want to grow, but because they haven't trained their mind to detach from judgment. What they never told you is that the highest performers have trained their minds to crave correction, not because they enjoy being wrong, but because they value being right more than looking right. That is the distinction. That is what unlocks mastery. When your identity becomes so committed to the mission that ego dissolves and progress becomes the only goal worth protecting. And here is where it gets even more profound. What they truly hid from you is that identity is not found, it is forged. Most people spend their lives trying to find themselves, as if identity is something buried in the dirt. But the successful know better. They don't find, they forge. They sculpt. They chip away the false. They build through choice, through discipline, through defiant repetition, through thousands of small, unsexy moments that no one else sees. And eventually, the forged self becomes the dominant self, the unshakable self, the one that doesn't need external approval because it lives by internal proof. And from this proof comes confidence, not hype, not noise, quiet, deep-rooted certainty, the kind of confidence that cannot be faked because it was earned one moment at a time. Understand this. If you feel stuck, it's not because you're weak. It's because the programming running your life is outdated. The hardware is fine, the software needs upgrading. And that upgrade begins the moment you stop identifying with your current limitations. You must begin speaking from your future, not your past. From where you're going, not from where you've been. The mind doesn't care about truth. It cares about consistency. If you consistently say, I'm inconsistent, I can't focus, I'm not disciplined, the mind doesn't debate, it just obeys. But if you begin saying, I follow through, I finish what I start, I am focused, the mind will begin adjusting to match, not immediately, not magically, but eventually, because the mind is loyal, and it will always move in the direction of your most repeated instructions. Let's bring it back to behavior. You don't need to overhaul everything at once. That's not how systems are built. You need one behavior, repeated, one ritual, protected, one standard, enforced. That's the wedge that breaks the old pattern. And once that wedge is in place, momentum builds. The mind loves momentum. It responds to progress with dopamine. It begins to associate growth with pleasure. And when pleasure and growth are linked, discipline becomes natural. You'll start to crave the gym, crave the work, crave the clarity. Not because the task is easy, but because your identity now depends on it. And when your identity depends on something, it becomes self-sustaining. That's the real win. Not just doing it, but becoming someone who does it. And that shift? That's the difference between a short burst of effort and a lifetime of transformation. So here's your charge. Audit your system. Audit your language. Audit your behavior. Audit your environment. And wherever there's a gap between who you are and who you intend to be, close it daily. This is not a sprint, it's a system. And systems succeed where willpower fails. If you build the system, the mind will follow. The results will follow. The people, the opportunities, the clarity, it all follows the system. Not because the universe is handing out favors, but because the mind is finally being used the way it was designed to execute, to repeat, and to build. So stop looking for magic. Start installing systems, because systems, not spurts, shape destiny.